The elevator doors slid open with a hushed pneumatic hiss, revealing the 42nd floor lobby of Davis & Partners, where the air smelled of lemon polish and billable hours. I did not brush the melting snow from my shoulders. Instead, I let the gray Chicago slush drip onto the pristine marble floor, a small and petty act of defiance that felt entirely necessary. My coat was off the rack from a department store sale, a sharp contrast to the room I was about to enter. But for Harper Montgomery, a 32-year-old forensic auditor who made a living exposing fraud appearances, were just another variable to be analyzed. Inside the conference room, the tableau was already set. My parents, Robert and Susan, sat in high-backed leather chairs that looked more like thrones, while my sister Tiffany occupied the center seat, draped in black Dior that probably cost more than my entire year of tuition had. She was tapping her manicured fingernail against a crystal water glass, a rhythmic tink-tink-tink that betrayed the anxiety vibrating beneath her perfect foundation. I took the folding chair Davis's assistant had set up in the corner, the metal cold against my spine. I am trained to look for the discrepancies in a spreadsheet, the anomalies in a pattern, and right now the anomaly was the sheer amount of tension radiating from the woman who was about to inherit an empire. Mr. Davis cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses before breaking the seal on the heavy cream envelope. He bypassed the preamble. The Hamptons estate went to Tiffany. The controlling interest in the family stocks went to Tiffany. Then came the cash sum. $1 million liquid immediate transferred from the grandfather's private trust to continue the family's charitable legacy. Tiffany exhaled a sound that was less relief and more a release of hydraulic pressure, and her shoulders dropped an inch. My mother reached over to squeeze her hand, her eyes glistening with a pride that had never once been directed at me. Then Davis turned to me. He did not read from a document. Instead, he reached under the mahogany table and produced a small, cheap wooden frame, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $5. Behind the glass lay a single wrinkled $1 bill. "For Harper," Davis said, his voice devoid of inflection. My father snorted a harsh sound in the quiet room. "At least he left you the bus fare home, Harper," he said, and my mother covered her mouth to hide a smile that did not reach her eyes. I stood up and walked to the table. I did not look at my parents. My eyes were fixed on the frame. It was insulting, yes, but Arthur Montgomery was many things: ruthless, brilliant, cold, but he was never petty without a purpose. He was a man who calculated the trajectory of every penny. I took the frame. On the back, written in his sharp, architectural handwriting, was a single line of blue ink. "Truth is cheap, but the price is not. Tiffany knows why." I looked up, catching Tiffany's reflection in the window, where the gray city loomed behind us. She was not smiling anymore. She had gone rigid, her hand freezing halfway to her water glass. It was a freeze response, the biological reaction of prey, sensing a predator. Her eyes darted rapidly to Davis, searching for something: complicity perhaps, or a warning, but the lawyer remained a stone wall. In my line of work, you learn to read the silence between the numbers. And right now, the silent screaming from my sister was deafening. She was terrified. The resentment that usually simmered in my gut cooled instantly into something sharper, more clinical. This was not a rejection. This was an assignment. I tucked the frame under my arm and walked out without saying a word, leaving the million-dollar heir trembling in her designer silk. My apartment in the Ukrainian village was a stark contrast to the loop filled with the scent of old paper and coffee. Rather than leather and money, it was small, orderly, and mine. I placed the frame on my kitchen island under the harsh light of the overhead lamp. I grabbed a pair of pliers from my utility drawer and pried up the metal tabs on the back of the frame. My hands were steady. There was no letter hidden behind the backing. There was no map drawn in invisible ink. There was just the bill. I smoothed the currency out of the counter. It was a standard Federal Reserve note series, 1999. It was dirty soft from years of circulation, with a small tear in the corner. Most people would see $1. I saw data. 1999 was the year grandfather Arthur established the primary family trust. It was the year the empire went from successful to astronomical. I pulled my laptop open and logged into the secure server I had built years ago when I was 22, freshly graduated and still trying to buy my way into the family's affection with competence. Grandfather had given me access to his personal cloud archives to digitize his old records. He never revoked the access, perhaps because he forgot, or perhaps because he knew that one day the auditor in me would need to balance the books. I typed in the serial number from the dollar bill C741LND. The search bar blinked. No results in the public records. No results in the family emails. I switched to the encrypted partition, the deep storage where he kept the files he didn't want the IRS or his son to see. I entered the serial number again. File found ledger _741.enc. It was password protected. I paused my fingers, hovering over the keys. Tiffany would have guessed money. My father would have guessed his own name. I typed in 08121992, my birthday. The screen flashed green, and the file opened. It was not a letter of love or an explanation of why I was the disappointment of the family. It was a spreadsheet. Rows and columns of transactions dating back 5 years, routing through a company I had never heard of, leading directly into the accounts of the charitable foundation Tiffany ran. It was a shadow ledger. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the single-dollar bill on the counter. He hadn't left me an inheritance. He had left me the evidence. My phone buzzed 3 days later. It was my mother. Susan Montgomery did not call unless there was a crisis or a gala. And since she wasn't currently wearing a ball gown on Instagram, I assumed it was the former. "Harper, darling," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that usually cost extra. "I was thinking about you. Your father and I? We feel terrible about how the reading went. Why don't you come over for dinner, just the two of us, girls' night?" I hesitated. The rational part of my brain, the part that analyzed risk for a living, screamed that this was a trap. But there is a small treacherous part of me, the nine wing of my personality, that craves peace, that wanted to believe her. Maybe she saw the injustice. Maybe she wanted to make it right. "Okay," I said, 7 o'clock. The family house in Lake Forest was a sprawling Tudor estate that always felt more like a museum than a home. My mother greeted me at the door with a glass of Chardonnay and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We sat in the solarium surrounded by orchids that cost more than my car. She started with small talk, complimenting my hair, which hadn't changed in 5 years, before pivoting with the grace of a seasoned politician. "You know, Harper," she said, swirling her wine, "I've been thinking about that dollar bill. It's quaint. A real piece of family history. Your father and I were thinking we'd like to frame it properly, put it in the library with grandfather's other memorabilia." She leaned forward, placing a hand on my knee. Her grip was tight. "We'd be willing to buy it from you, $50,000. Consider it a late graduation present. A way to help you with your situation." $50,000, it was a lot of money. It was an apology. It was an olive branch. Then I saw it. Resting against the pulse point of her neck was a necklace, platinum encrusted with sapphires and diamonds. It was the Midnight Star from the new Tiffany & Co. collection. I knew because I had audited the credit card statements of the Montgomery Foundation 2 days ago. There was a charge for donor appreciation gifts that matched the price of that necklace exactly. $55,000. She wasn't wearing an heirloom. She was wearing evidence. The warmth in my chest evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of my sigh. She didn't want the dollar for sentimental reasons. She wanted it because Tiffany had told her about the note. She wanted to destroy the only link between the will and the crimes they were all committing. "No," I said, setting my wineglass down. My mother's face changed instantly. The mask of maternal concern dissolved, revealing the steel beneath. She withdrew her hand. "Don't be difficult, Harper. You always have to make everything so hard. Tiffany deserves that money. She's the one who stayed. She's the one who built the foundation's reputation while you were off playing detective." "She didn't build it," I said, standing up. "She's looting it." "You ungrateful little—" She cut herself off, taking a sharp breath. "Get out. If you're going to be an enemy to this family, then leave." I walked out into the cold night air. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from rage. I had my answer. There were no allies in that house, only accomplices. Back at my apartment, I dove into the data with a new ferocity. I had the shadow ledger from grandfather's files. Now I needed the public face. I pulled up the Montgomery Foundation's tax returns, the Form 990s that are public record for any nonprofit. I placed the two screens side by side. On the left, the foundation's official expenses, construction consulting, logistics management, event coordination. On the right, the shadow ledger. The companies billing the foundation, Apex Logistics Summit Consulting Meridian Events, didn't exist. Their addresses were P.O. boxes in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The invoices were generated by a software program, the timestamps identical down to the second. Tiffany wasn't just skimming off the top. She was gutting the charity. Money donated for pediatric cancer research was being siphoned into these shell companies, then routed back to her personal accounts disguised as dividends or consulting fees. And then I saw the entry that made my blood run cold. $1 million. It was sitting in an escrow account linked to the shell company network. The date of the transfer was 2 weeks before grandfather died. He had found it. He had frozen the account. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The $1 million in the will wasn't grandfather's money. It was the stolen money. He was giving Tiffany back her own loot, but with a catch. To claim it as an inheritance, she had to sign legal documents accepting the transfer from that specific account. If she accepted it, she was acknowledging ownership of the funds. She was admitting that the money in the shell company was hers. It was a trap, a brilliant, lethal trap. If she took the money, she was guilty of money laundering. If she didn't, the money stayed frozen and whatever debt she was trying to pay would come due. A knock on my door startled me. It was late past 11. I checked the peephole. It was Tiffany. She looked like a wreck. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes rimmed with red. She wasn't wearing Dior tonight. She was wearing a tracksuit and trembling. I opened the door. She pushed past me, pacing my small living room like a caged animal. "I need that $1, Harper," she said, her voice cracking. "I know you have the code. Mom said you wouldn't sell." "Tell me the truth," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. "Why do you need the money so badly?" "The foundation pays you a 6-figure salary." "It's not enough," she screamed, spinning around. "You don't understand the pressure. The galas, the press, the donors. It costs a fortune to be me, to be us." She collapsed onto my sofa, burying her face in her hands. "I borrowed money from people you don't say no to. Venture capitalists, they called themselves. But they're loan sharks in Armani suits. I owe them exactly $1 million. If I don't pay by the audit next week, they're going to release photos. They're going to destroy me." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I did it for the family, Harper, to keep up appearances. Dad's bad investments, Mom's shopping. I covered it all. Do you want them to see us fall? Do you want to see Mom and Dad on the street? You stole from sick children, Tiffany," I said, my voice low and steady. "You didn't do it for the family. You did it for your ego." Her face hardened. The vulnerable sister vanished, replaced by the queen bee I knew so well. "You've always been jealous of me," she spat. "That's what this is about, isn't it? You're the boring one, the invisible one. And now you have power and you're loving it. You want to see me beg." "I don't want you to beg," I said. "I want you to be accountable." "Accountable." She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Grow up, Harper. The world doesn't run on your little rules. Give me the code, or I swear to God I will use every contact I have to make sure you never work in this city again." She slammed the door on her way out. I stood in the silence of my apartment. The accusation of jealousy stung not because it was true, but because she reduced my integrity to something so petty. She thought this was a sibling rivalry. She didn't understand. It was structural. She had broken the laws of the system. She had corrupted the ledger, and I was the auditor. I looked at the dollar bill on my desk. I knew what I had to do. Finding the truth wasn't enough anymore. I had to enforce the verdict. I woke up to an email from Mr. Davis. It was flagged as urgent, the subject line simply reading, "Codicil execution required." The attachment was a dense legal document, the kind written in a language designed to obfuscate rather than clarify. But the gist was simple. Grandfather Arthur had added a final condition to the inheritance transfer. The release of the funds was contingent upon a third-party audit of the source account to ensure compliance with the newly updated anti-money laundering statutes. And the auditor appointed by the deceased was me. I stared at the screen, my coffee turning cold. He had not just given me the evidence, he had given me the gavel. I was the only person who could unlock the money Tiffany desperately needed. If I signed off on the audit confirming the funds were legitimate family assets, the bank would release the $1 million. Tiffany would pay her debts. The family secrets would remain buried. But I would be committing perjury. I would be using my license, my reputation, my entire professional identity to launder dirty money. If I refused, the audit would fail. The funds would be frozen indefinitely pending a federal investigation. Tiffany would default on her debt to the loan sharks. My parents would lose their lifestyle. I was trapped between two impossible choices: moral suicide or familial annihilation. The intercom buzzed 2 hours later. They didn't even wait for me to answer. My parents and Tiffany were at my door before I could fully process the intrusion. The dynamic had shifted entirely since the will reading. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, animalistic desperation. My father, Robert Montgomery, a man who had never looked at me without a hint of disappointment, dropped to his knees on my hardwood floor. The sight was so jarring, so physically wrong, that I took a step back. He grabbed my hand, his palm sweating. "Harper, please?" He wept, actual tears tracking through the broken veins on his cheeks. "You have to sign it. You're the only one who can save us." "Well." My mother was pacing, wringing a handkerchief that looked like it cost more than my couch. "They'll kill her, Harper. Those people. They don't care about laws. If Tiffany doesn't pay by Friday, they said they'd come for us all. You can't let that happen. You're her sister. Tiffany sat on the floor, her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. She looked small. The queen bee had been crushed. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. I messed up, I know I messed up, but I don't want to die. I looked at them. This was the family I had spent my life trying to please. I had gotten straight A's, graduated with honors, built a career on integrity, all in the hopes that one day they would see me as valuable. And now they finally saw me, not as a daughter but as a utility, a tool to fix their mistakes. A deep, hollow ache spread through my chest. Is this what it means to be good, to be the one who cleans up the mess? Or is this just enabling? The type 1 in me screamed that this was wrong. It was a violation of every principle I held dear. But the disintegration to type 4 was pulling me under. I felt misunderstood, isolated, the tragic figure, forced to bear the sins of others. Was my integrity just cruelty in disguise? Was I punishing them because I was righteous or because I was hurt? If I sign this, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I lose everything, my license, my career. If anyone finds out, no one will find out, my mother shrieked, grabbing my shoulders. It's just a signature, just one signature, Harper. Do you love your sister more than a piece of paper? Do you love us? The manipulation was blatant, clumsy, and devastatingly effective. They were weaponizing my own desire to be good against me. If I didn't sign, I was the villain who let her sister die. If I did sign, I was a criminal. I looked at the document Davis had sent over, printed and waiting on my desk. The lines of text blurred. I saw Tiffany's terrified face. I saw my father on his knees. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with the weight of decades of dysfunction. I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of fighting. I walked to the desk. I picked up my pen, a heavy Mont Blanc that I had bought for myself when I passed my CPA exam. It felt like a lead weight in my hand. Okay, I said. The word tasted like ash. My parents let out a collective sob of relief. Tiffany looked up, hoping warring with disbelief in her eyes. But listen to me, I said, staring at the paper, unable to look at them. After this, I am done. I am not your daughter anymore. I am not your sister. You bought this signature with the last shred of my respect. Do not call me. Do not come here. We are strangers. Anything, my father choked out. Just sign it. I pressed the pen to the paper. I could feel the texture of the grain under the nib. I signed my name, Harper Montgomery. The ink was black and permanent. Tiffany scrambled up and snatched the paper before the ink was even dry, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She was laughing now, a hysterical, wet sound that grated on my nerves. My parents hugged her, then turned to hug me, but I stepped back, putting the desk between us. I looked at them with eyes that felt dry and empty. They had what they wanted. They had survived. And I was hollowed out. Go, I said. They left, a flurry of gratitude and relief that felt like a slap in the face. The door clicked shut, and I was alone in the silence of my apartment. I looked down at my hand. There was a smudge of ink on my pinky finger. I rubbed at it, but it wouldn't come off. I had stained myself. I had broken the rules. I had compromised. But as I stood there in the quiet, a strange calmness settled over me. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over. They didn't know that an auditor's job isn't just to sign off on the numbers. It's to ensure they balance. And the books were far from balanced. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had memorized from the bottom of the shadow ledger file. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Chicago Field Office, a voice answered. I'd like to report a case of money laundering involving the Montgomery Foundation. I said, my voice steady. My name is Harper Montgomery. I have the evidence. And I just signed the document that proves it. The invitations for Tiffany's Victory Gala were printed on heavy cardstock, with gold leaf embossing summoning Chicago's elite to the Lake Forest estate to celebrate the restructuring and revitalization of the Montgomery Foundation. I arrived 20 minutes late. I wore a tailored navy suit, sharp and severe, standing out like a bruise in a sea of pastel silks and velvet tuxedos. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, a cloying sweetness that made my teeth ache. Tiffany held court near the ice sculpture, a glass of vintage Dom Perignon in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked radiant, the picture of a philanthropist saved from the brink, her earlier desperation buried under layers of professional makeup and relief. My parents stood beside her, beaming like monarchs who had successfully quelled a peasant rebellion. When Tiffany saw me, her smile sharpened into something predatory. She tapped a spoon against her glass, silencing the string quartet and drawing the room's attention. And there she is, Tiffany announced, her voice projecting effortlessly. My sister Harper. We should all thank her. She finally realized that family comes first. She signed the papers that saved our legacy. She raised her glass in my direction, a gesture that looked like a toast but felt like a dismissal. I hope that dollar bill keeps you warm at night, Harper. It suits you. A ripple of polite, cruel laughter moved through the crowd. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply checked my watch. It was 8:02 p.m. The wire transfer protocols for amounts over $10,000 usually cleared the Federal Reserve System in batches on the hour. Right on cue, Tiffany's phone chimed. It was a specific melodic alert she had set for banking notifications. She glanced at the screen, and her eyes widened in triumph. "It's done," she whispered, loud enough for the inner circle to hear. "The funds have been cleared. We're back." My mother let out a breathy laugh and hugged her. My father clapped a hand on Julian's shoulder. They were celebrating the successful laundering of $1 million. They believed my signature on the release form was a capitulation, a surrender of my moral code to their will. They didn't understand how audits worked. You don't stop a crime by refusing to acknowledge it. You stop it by documenting its completion. By signing that release, I hadn't condoned the theft. I had authorized the evidence. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the caterers. A dozen men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI and IRSCI poured into the room. The music died instantly. The silence that followed was absolute heavy, with the sudden terrifying intrusion of reality into their fantasy world. Tiffany Montgomery, a lead agent, barked, stepping through the crowd that parted like the Red Sea. "Step away from the guests and keep your hands where we can see them." "Excuse me," Tiffany laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Do you know who I am? This is a private residence. We have a warrant for your arrest." The agent continued, his voice bored and professional. "Charges include wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. We also have a warrant to seize all electronic devices on the premises." My father stepped forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "This is preposterous. My daughter just received a legitimate inheritance. We have the paperwork signed by an independent auditor." "We know Mr. Montgomery," the agent said. "She's the one who sent us." The room turned to look at me. My parents, Tiffany, the donors, their expressions shifted from confusion to horror. I didn't move. I watched as the agent approached Tiffany. She tried to back away, dropping her phone. It clattered on the marble floor, the screen still glowing with the notification of the deposit. That deposit was the final nail. Until the money moved from the shell company to her personal account, it was just a conspiracy. Now it was a completed federal crime, traceable, tangible, and irreversible. "Harper," Tiffany gasped as the agent pulled her wrists behind her back. The handcuffs clicked, a mechanical sound that cut through the room sharper than any knife. "Harper, tell them you signed it. You said it was clean." "I signed a release form authorizing the bank to transfer the funds," I said, my voice steady, carrying clearly across the silent room. "And then I signed a sworn affidavit attached to a 300-page forensic report detailing exactly where those funds came from. I submitted it to the Chicago field office 5 minutes after I left my apartment last week." "You traitor!" my mother screamed, lunging toward me before my father held her back. "You ruined us. You promised." "I promised to do my job," I replied. "I'm an auditor, Mother. I don't erase debts. I balance them." The agents began to escort Tiffany out. She was stumbling in her heels, weeping, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. The midnight star necklace around my mother's neck seemed to weigh her down, pulling her toward the floor. The facade of the Montgomery dynasty wasn't just cracking, it was disintegrating into dust. I walked over to where Tiffany stood, momentarily paused by the agents near the exit. She looked at me with pure hatred, stripped of all her social armor. "You have nothing," she hissed. "You have $1 and no family." "I have the truth," I said calmly. "And unlike you, I can sleep at night. You borrowed against reality for years, Tiffany. You spent money that didn't exist to buy admiration you didn't earn. The audit is closed, and the interest is due." I watched them lead her out into the flashing lights of the police cruisers. I turned to my parents, who were now slumped in their chairs, surrounded by whispering guests who were already distancing themselves from the scandal. I didn't feel the need to say goodbye. The contract was terminated. I walked out the front door, past the bewildered valet, and into the cool night air. I reached into my pocket and touched the edges of the folded copy of the Shadow Ledger. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally felt clean. For the first time in my life, the numbers balanced perfectly. I was free. The fallout was not explosive. It was a slow, quiet rot. 6 months after the gala, the Montgomery name was a stain on the society pages, a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails at the university club. Tiffany was serving a minimum of 5 years in a federal facility for wire fraud and embezzlement. My parents, having liquidated their assets to cover legal fees and social ostracism, had downsized to a condominium in Florida, a gilded cage where they could live out their days in quiet shame. I had changed my name, shedding Montgomery like a snake sheds its skin, and moved to a small functional office in the West Loop. I received one final call from Mr. Davis. His voice was the same as it had always been, a dry rustle of old paper. He had something for me, the final codicil of my grandfather's will, to be opened only after all other matters were settled. We met at a downtown bank, not his office. He handed me a small brass key. The safe deposit box was in a vault that smelled of cold steel and preserved wealth. Inside there was no cash, no bearer bonds, no jewelry. There was only a single manila folder. Within the folder was a letter penned in Grandfather Arthur's precise script and a stack of legal documents. To Harper, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you did what I could not. You balanced the books. I did not raise a son, I raised a liability. I did not have a granddaughter, I had an asset. But you were always a variable. I could not account for an anomaly of integrity in a system of compromises. I could not protect you from them, for to do so would have made you weak. But I could give you a weapon, and a choice. This firm, he wrote, was my first. I built it on logic and facts before the Montgomery name became a brand to be managed. It is small, clean, and unburdened by our family's rot. It is now yours. Do with it what you will. The documents were the deed and charter for a small, respected auditing firm I had long admired from a distance, now legally transferred to my name. He hadn't given me money. He had given me a foundation. He had given me work. He had given me a clean ledger. I closed the folder. I did not cry. Instead, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the internal scales I lived by finally settled into a perfect, quiet equilibrium. He had understood. He knew the only inheritance that would ever matter to me was the chance to build something true. I have a copy of the $1 bill framed on the wall of my new office. I see it every day. It's not there to remind me of my grandfather, but to remind me of my price. You see, family for many is a sanctuary. But for some of us, for people like me, and maybe for people like you, it is a cage gilded with manipulative phrases like, because we're blood, and for the sake of your parents. We who carry the burden of perfection and responsibility are often the easiest hostages to those words. We are terrified of being the bad guy. We are terrified of disrupting the order. But you need to understand this. A toxic relationship, even one of family, is a bad debt on your life's ledger. The longer you carry it, the higher the compound interest on your soul. You cannot audit your own life if you keep tolerating emotional fraud. Do not wait for someone to leave you $1 million to feel valuable. And do not let the $1 of contempt break you. Use it. Use that contempt as fuel. Let them underestimate you while you quietly gather your data, build your case, and sharpen your tools. Justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from the quiet courage to sign your own Declaration of Independence from the people who hurt you and to walk away with your head held high, even if all you have in your pocket is a single dollar. That is the dollar of freedom, and it is priceless. The rain in Chicago has a way of washing the city gray, stripping away the pretension of the Gold Coast until everything looks like wet concrete. I stood by the window of my new office in the West Loop, watching the pedestrians below hurry against the wind. The office was not large, but it was mine, paid for with billable hours and clean money. On the wall behind my desk, the framed $1 bill caught the afternoon light, a silent sentinel watching over the new ledger I was building. My assistant buzzed in. A young woman was waiting. Her name was Nina, and she had called 3 times yesterday. When she walked in, she brought the smell of damp wool and fear with her. She was young, maybe 24, dressed in clothes that were expensive but ill-fitting, as if she were shrinking inside them. She sat on the edge of the chair, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. I did not start with pleasantries. I poured her a cup of hot water and waited. In my line of work, silence is the best interrogator. My father said I'm crazy, Nina whispered, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from the cup. He said the trust fund creates itself, that I don't need to see the statements because I wouldn't understand the math. Math is the only universal language, Nina, I said softly. If someone tells you not to read it, it is usually because the story the numbers tell is not the one they are selling you. She slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a dividend statement from a family holding company. It looked standard to the untrained eye, but to a forensic auditor, it was screaming. The font on the date stamp was a fraction of a millimeter off. The routing number belonged to a bank that had ceased operations 2 years ago. He wants me to sign a power of attorney, she said, her voice trembling. He says if I don't, I'm betraying the family legacy. He says I'm being difficult, ungrateful. The words hit me like a physical echo. ungrateful, difficult, traitor. The vocabulary of toxic families is remarkably consistent. I looked at Nina and I saw myself sitting in that mahogany conference room, feeling the weight of my parents' disappointment crushing my lungs. I saw the fear that compliance was the only currency that could buy love. I stood up and took the frame off the wall. I placed the $1 bill on the desk between us. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. She shook her head. "This is the price of my freedom," I said. "My family told me I was worth nothing without their money. They told me that protecting their lies was my duty as a daughter. I believed them for 32 years. I thought that if I just fixed their mistakes enough times, if I just balanced their books one more day, they would finally love me." I tapped the glass over the wrinkled bill. "But love that requires you to lie is not love. It is a hostage situation, and respect that you have to buy with your silence is not respect. It is a bribe." Nina looked up, tears spilling over. "But if I don't sign, I lose them. I lost everything." "You lose the illusion," I corrected her. "And it will hurt. It will feel like you are cutting off a limb, but the alternative is gangrene. If you sign that power of attorney, you aren't saving your family. You are enabling the rot that will eventually destroy them and you." I pulled a fresh engagement letter from my drawer. I didn't push it toward her. I just left it there, an open door. "I can audit this," I said. "I can find where the money actually went. I can give you the truth, but I cannot give you permission to walk away. You have to sign that for yourself." Nina looked at the fraudulent dividend statement, then at the engagement letter, and finally at the dollar bill. I saw the moment the shift happened. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders dropped. The terrified girl vanished, and a woman who was tired of being lied to took her place. She picked up the pen. "Audit them," she said. As she signed her name, I felt the familiar click of the universe, aligning the balance sheet of the world, correcting itself by one small fraction. This is the work now. It is not just about finding the missing money. It is about helping people find the missing parts of themselves. So here is the question you must ask yourself when the people you love demand your blind loyalty. Look at the cost. Not the money, but the cost to your soul. If the price of belonging is your integrity, the cost is too high. You are the only auditor of your life. Do not let anyone else cook the books. Walk away with your $1 of truth. It is enough to start over. It is enough to build an empire of your own. You might be looking at that framed dollar bill on my wall and thinking it is just a souvenir of a petty family squabble. But I want you to look closer, because that dollar represents the most expensive thing I ever bought. It represents the moment I stopped paying interest on a debt I never owed. We are raised, especially in families like mine, and perhaps families like yours, on a steady diet of unconditional loyalty, where we are taught that family is the ultimate safety net, and that to question it is a form of betrayal. We are taught to keep the peace, even when the peace is built on a foundation of lies. But here is the hard truth that no one tells you at the dinner table, which is that financial abuse often disguises itself as tradition. It hides behind phrases like, "Don't worry your pretty little head about the numbers," or "We do this for the family name." But when you allow someone else to control your narrative and your resources without question, you are not being a good daughter or a good partner. You are being a silent partner in your own destruction. I want you to think about the last time you swallowed a question because you were afraid of the answer, or think about the last time you apologized for asking for transparency, and ask yourself why you did that. Was it because you were wrong, or was it because you have been conditioned to believe that your need for clarity is an act of aggression? Because in my profession, we have a saying that numbers do not lie, but people do. If someone you love reacts with rage or guilt when you ask to see the ledger, it is because they are banking on your fear being stronger than your logic, and they are counting on you valuing their comfort more than your own security. You have to be willing to be the bad guy in their story, to be the hero in yours. And it is a terrifying shift, because when I signed those papers, I wasn't just signing away $1 million. I was signing away the approval of the people I had spent my life trying to impress. I became a traitor and an ungrateful child, and I'm asking you today if you are brave enough to accept those labels. Are you willing to be called difficult if it means being free? And are you willing to be cut out of the will if it means being written back into your own life? I want you to really sit with that question and ask yourself if you have ever felt that knot in your stomach when a family member asks for a favor that feels like a demand, or if you have ever felt like your affection is being purchased, or that your inheritance is being held over your head like a weapon. If you have, I want you to know that you are not crazy and you are not alone, because that feeling is your intuition conducting an audit, so listen to it. Share your story if you can, because I want to know if you have ever had to draw a line in the sand that cost you a relationship. And what was your $1 moment when you realized that the price of admission to your family circle was just too high? Writing it down is the first step in balancing your own books, and it is the first step in realizing that you are not a liability to be managed, but an asset to be cherished. You do not need $1 million to start over. You just need the truth and the courage to sign your name to it because the ledger of your life belongs to you, and it is time you took back the pen.